You have stood in front of a chimpanzee enclosure at some point in your life. You remember it. The glass, the smell of hay, a chimp sitting perfectly still, watching you back. Not the crowd. You. And for one uncomfortable second, something in your chest recognized something in its eyes. That feeling has a name in evolutionary biology, and it is not closeness to animals. It is kinship. Real, measurable, genetic kinship. But here is where most people get the story wrong. You did not evolve from a chimpanzee. The chimpanzee did not evolve from you either. Somewhere in the deep past, a single creature existed, and both of you walked away from it in opposite directions. The real answer is far stranger than we came from apes, because that creature has never been found. Nobody has ever held its skull. Nobody knows its face. Scientists just call it the last common ancestor, or LCA, and it might be the most important extinct animal you have never heard of. Here is the number everyone quotes. Somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago, a single ancestral population split into two branches. One branch, over unimaginable stretches of time, became the chimpanzees and bonobos alive today. The other branch became you. That number sounds precise. It is not. It is a negotiated compromise between two completely different kinds of evidence. Evidence that, for decades, has refused to fully agree with itself. One kind of evidence lives inside your own cells. Every strand of DNA mutates at a roughly steady rate over generations, like a clock ticking quietly whether anyone is watching or not. Compare your genome to a chimpanzee's, count the differences, divide by the ticking rate, and you get a date. This is called the molecular clock, and on paper it sounds beautifully simple. It is not simple at all. Your genome and a chimpanzee's differ by a little over 1%, depending on which sections you compare. Close enough that the two of you share roughly 98.8% of your DNA. Run that 1% through the clock, and some calculations land the split at 5 million years ago. Others push it out past 12, even 13. Same species, same math, wildly different answers. Why? Because the clock is not one clock. It is thousands of tiny clocks, one for every gene, and they do not all tick at the same speed. Mutation rates shift with generation length, with body size, with variables scientists still do not fully understand. A gene can start drifting apart between two populations millions of years before those populations actually stop interbreeding. So when researchers say human and chimp genes diverged 13 million years ago, that is not the same claim as the species splitting 13 million years ago. The genes can begin wandering apart while the populations are still, technically, one, still crossing paths, still occasionally mixing. The other kind of evidence is older than DNA analysis by more than a century. It is bone, stone, actual physical remains pulled out of actual dirt. And on this front, the record is almost insultingly thin. In 2001, a team led by French paleontologist Michel Brunet was digging in the Jurab Desert of Chad, a location nobody expected, thousands of kilometers west of the Rift Valley sites that had produced nearly every major hominin fossil before it. What they found was a skull so old, so strange, it forced a rewrite of the map itself. They called it Sahelanthropus chadensis. Its nickname, given by the local excavation team, was Toumaï, meaning hope of life in the Goron language of Chad. It is dated to roughly 7 million years old, right at the edge of when the split is thought to have happened. Its brain was smaller than a chimpanzee's. Its face was flat, its brow ridge-heavy and ape-like. And yet, the opening at the base of its skull, where the spinal cord connects to the brain, sits farther forward than it does in a knuckle-walking ape. In you, that opening sits almost directly underneath your skull because your spine holds your head up like a pole balancing a ball. In a chimpanzee, it sits toward the back, angled, because the spine comes in from behind. Toumaï's opening sits somewhere in between, which means possibly Toumaï walked upright, or partly upright, or not at all. Some researchers argue the skull was crushed and distorted underground for 7 million years, and any reading of that angle is guesswork wearing the costume of certainty. A major femur analysis reignited the same argument as recently as this year, and it still has not been settled. And Chad itself was a problem. For decades, the dominant theory of human origins was known as the East Side story. The idea that a shifting Rift Valley split East Africa's ape population in two, forest on one side, open grassland on the other, and only the grassland half evolved into something walking upright. Toumaï was dug up 2,500 kilometers to the west, nowhere near that rift. A single skull, in the wrong place on the map, and an entire tidy theory needed rewriting. A few million years later, and a few thousand kilometers east in Kenya, another candidate turned up. Orrorin tugenensis, meaning original man, dated to around 6 million years old. Its most famous fossil is a single thigh bone, just a femur. Paleontologists have spent 2 decades arguing over what the shape of one bone can and cannot prove about how a creature walked. Then, in Ethiopia, came the fossil that changed the picture most dramatically. Her name was Ardi, Ardipithecus ramidus. Discovered in fragments starting in the early 1990s, but not fully assembled and analyzed until 2009, because the bones were so fragile that lead researcher Tim White and his team spent 17 years painstakingly reconstructing a skeleton crushed nearly flat by millions of years of sediment. When they finally published, the journal Science named it the breakthrough of the year. Ardi lived 4.4 million years ago, younger than Toumaï, younger than Orrorin, but complete enough to actually study, so hands, feet, pelvis, skull, and she broke an assumption almost everyone had quietly been making. For decades, the working theory was simple. The last common ancestor probably looked like a chimpanzee because chimpanzees look primitive and humans look evolved. Chimps, the thinking went, were basically living time machines. Press play and you are looking at your ancestor. Ardi said otherwise. She had a grasping big toe, built for climbing, like an ape, but her pelvis was shaped for walking upright, unlike an ape. She was not a halfway chimp. She was not a halfway human. She was her own thing entirely. Evidence that chimpanzees have spent the last 7 million years evolving too, adapting to their own forests, becoming knuckle-walking specialists in ways the shared ancestor itself may never have been. Which means the picture you have been carrying your whole life, humans graduating out of something more chimp-like, may simply be backwards. Here is where the story gets stranger still. In 2006, a research team led by geneticist Nick Patterson, working alongside David Reich's lab, published a finding in the journal Nature that unsettled the whole field. They compared the human and chimpanzee genomes chromosome by chromosome, and one chromosome stood out. The X chromosome showed a divergence time dramatically younger than every other chromosome in the genome. Their explanation was almost unbelievable. What if the split was not one clean break? What if the ancestral population divided, drifted apart for a while, and then, before fully separating, came back together? Interbred, mixed genes one more time. Only after that second, messier event did the two lineages finally, permanently part ways. Other researchers pushed back hard, arguing the same pattern could emerge naturally from a very large ancestral population with no hybridization event at all. That debate has never fully closed, but even the pushback agrees on something stranger than either side's original claim. The split was not a moment. It was a slow, blurred process, stretched across hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, populations drifting, mixing, drifting again. There was no single day the line was drawn, no final handshake. And here is the detail that rarely makes it into the popular version of this story. Scientists have never confirmed the last common ancestor itself. Not Toumaï, not Orrorin, not Ardi. None of them are proven to be it. They are candidates, close cousins possibly, standing near the fork in the road, not necessarily standing on it. Stranger still, almost no chimpanzee fossils exist at all, from any point across their own 7 million year history. Not because chimpanzees are rare, because rainforests are terrible at preserving bone. Wet, acidic ground crawling with scavengers recycles a body within years, sometimes within months. As of the last major discovery, the entire known chimpanzee fossil record came down to a set of molars, roughly 500,000 years old, found in Kenya in semi-arid ground, far from where chimpanzees actually live today. 3 teeth. That is the entire physical evidence for an entire branch of your own family tree, which means every reconstruction of what your last common ancestor looked like is built almost entirely from the human side of the family, and educated guesswork about the other. Think about that the next time you spit into a plastic tube for a home DNA kit, or fill out a family tree online, chasing a great-great-grandparent's name through a scanned church record, satisfied the moment a single document confirms a guess you already suspected. The report comes back with percentages, tidy little pie charts of where you came from, and it feels like certainty. Now imagine building that same tree with no documents at all. No church records, no photographs, no gravestones, No living relative to call and ask. Just a handful of bone fragments scattered across 3 countries and a genetic clock that cannot quite agree with itself on the date. That is not a metaphor for how paleoanthropologists work. It is a literal description of it. That is the actual state of the science, not a settled fact you memorized once in school. An active argument, running right now, in journals that get revised every few years, among people who have spent entire careers chasing a 7 million-year-old mystery they may never fully solve. You carry the ending of that argument inside every cell of your body, whether or not anyone ever finds its beginning. So the next time you stand in front of a chimpanzee enclosure and something in your chest recognizes something in its eyes, remember what you are actually looking at. Not your ancestor, a cousin, a distant living cousin who took a different fork in the same road you did millions of years ago, from a creature so far back and so poorly recorded that science still cannot show you its face. You are not looking into your past. You are looking at what else that shared beginning became.